We come on to the second noble truth, getting burned. And this is the illustration here, I think, can safely be said to represent Ajahn Sucitto at his most demonic, with the blazing fires of the circle of dependent origination, a couple of bug-eyed dragons, and a very demented and gap-toothed, cross-eyed monkey at the bottom. So I think he was really trying to evoke the whole sort of derangement of craving in the representation. So, chapter 6, second noble truth, getting burned. So the Pali reads, Idanko Bhikkhu dukkha samudayo ariyasachang yayang tanha pono bhavika nandiraga sahagata tatra tatra binandini seyaditang kama tanha bhavatanha vibhavatanha. He begins with one of his great phrases, a true classic. Circles can be peaceful, but they can also be vicious, when they represent, as these do, the regenerative aspect of the suffering that they describe. So it's one of my favorite Ajahn Sucitto phrases. Circles can be peaceful, but they can also be vicious. In the last frame, the man holds onto his chains. That's like the picture from the previous section. The man holds onto his chains, which are symbolic of the world of the five aggregates, with this figure burdened, buried under the weight of the chains formed in the shape of a large, massive sack that the fellow's carrying. The more he feels burdened by it, the harder he holds on, imagining all the while that by this effort he's preventing himself from being overwhelmed. So the heavier it is, the harder you hang on to it. Imagining all the while that by this effort he is preventing himself from being overwhelmed. The circle in this picture is fire, and its repetitive cycle is caused by the three forms of desire rooted in self, tanha. These three desires chase each other around in circles and are preoccupied with trying to eliminate each other. This is represented by the three violent creatures emanating from the central fire. Yes. The monkey at the bottom symbolizes the untrained mind, in that it always darts hither and thither, and the hand at the top, as in the last painting, is the hand of the Buddha held in the symbolic teaching gesture, the mudra. The little vignettes in the loops of fire I'll explain later. So all around the edges, what was just the burning chains in the first picture have sort of turned into these loops of fire, and within the loops you have these different figures around the edges there that represent the different aspects of dependent origination, which he will get to. If you felt dismayed by the first noble truth, but were determined to get to the heart of the matter, as was the case with those 5 bhikkhus, you're probably ready to go through the fire of the second noble truth, which is about the origin of suffering, and, by inference, of grasping. The Buddha points out, Idanko Bhikkhu, so then he repeats this passage that is the theme of this section, the translation of which is, Bhikkhus, there is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is desire which gives rise to fresh birth, bound up with relish and passion, running here and there, delighting in this and in that. In other words, sense desire, desire for existing, and desire for extinction. So yayang tanha is the word for desire or craving. Pono bhavika means giving rise to fresh birth. So the word for rebirth is pono bhava, which literally means again becoming. Pono bhava. Bound up with relish and passion, which is nandiraga sahagata. Nandi is delight. Raga is passion, as in the English word rage. Passion, the Pali word raga is related to that, passion. Running here and there. Nandi raga sahagata tatra tatra binandini, which Morris Walsh also translates very neatly as ever seeking fresh delight. Tatra tatra means here and there. Ever seeking fresh delight. Delighting in this and that. In other words, sense desire, desire for existing, and desire for extinction. So karma tanha, that's and also it's important to distinguish between the word karma, K-long-A-M-A, which means sense pleasure, and then kamma, which is K-double-M-A, which means action, or the Sanskrit for that is karma. So that the two words are quite different. So karma tanha is the one for sense desire. So it's not just a karma as in action that's being talked about here. So first of all, I'm going to say something about tanha, generally translated as desire. These translations are difficult because the words don't exactly correspond to the same meaning in the two languages. Dukkha is almost impossible to catch in a single word. Khandha doesn't mean much as an aggregate, and tanha, as desire, gives rise to some misinterpretations. What about the desire to realize truth? Is that suffering? Actually, tanha means thirst, and, as the context explains, is purely the kind of desire that wants something for me. At another time, the Buddha defined tanha simply as desire for sights, sounds, for fragrance, for tastes, for things to touch, and for ideas. Tanha, then, is the desire that pulls things inwards, not the desire that radiates out, like aspiration or compassion. These are all aspects of spiritual truth. It is a truth that cannot be grasped selfishly. In fact, you could summarize spiritual training as the transformation of selfish desire into selfless desire, zest and aspiration. And that second kind of desire is called chanda, or particularly Dhamma chanda, C-H-A-N-D-A. And as he points out, a huge amount of spiritual training revolves around transforming the habits and the energy of tanha, self-centered craving, to the chanda, which the interest or zeal, the enthusiasm, or zest, as he has here, for liberation and for the benefiting of others. So chanda is also desire. And so when people say, oh, the Buddha says desire is the root of all suffering, it's important to distinguish that there are skillful desires and unskillful desires. So the word tanha always represents that which is unskillful. It's invariably bound up with the feelings of self and self-benefit in some way, shape, or form. So you can't have dhanha for enlightenment. You can't have dhanha to have compassion in a genuine way. That kind of desire would not be tanha. It's sort of an opposite of that. Whereas chanda is a necessary aspect. That desire to be awakened, that desire to be enlightened, that desire to help others is a prerequisite condition. It's a necessity in terms of fulfilling those potentials. So, to carry on. The desire that acts as a motivation to know how things really are, beyond the grasp of the gratification instinct, is the needed vigor to carry one through the rough patches. So it's important that in abandoning the fantasized and deluded objects of desire, one doesn't sink into an apathetic fatalism, or into believing that the putting forth of energy in spiritual practice is another form of craving, which is a common misunderstanding that people think, oh, the Buddha said all kinds of desire, desire is the cause of suffering, therefore I should just turn myself into a potato, or something of that nature, just go numb, or stop feeling, or switch off, and I'm being desireless. But this is called wrong view, wrong understanding, and that's because it's not what is meant by the ending of desires. And when you tease those two kinds of desire apart, so you distinguish tanha from chanda, then that makes a lot more sense. As he says, the the putting forth of energy into spiritual practice is another form of craving. That would be a wrong view. Then consider the following reflection. Isn't the desire to extinguish desire an aspect of the desire for extinction? Sometimes you wish you didn't have any desires, and you feel really, really depressed by the inability to get rid of them. That's suffering, isn't it? When it comes down to it, a lot of the gratification instinct is about getting rid of itchy, hankering feelings. The First Noble Truth seems to say that life is suffering, but more accurately, it states that there is a range of feelings that we have to bear with through the experience of birth, aging, and death. This is experienced as suffering as long as the way things appear to us is taken as an absolute truth. The heart of the matter is that life is not a flawed experience. Rather, it is made that way by an unconscious activity of the mind. We don't realize that we're doing it. We're simply not aware at the level of the mind where the activity is born. These two truths, and a good deal of Buddhist mind training, help to focus our attention deeper in our heart so that we can stop the seeds of suffering from being planted. Suffering arises. It has an origin. We can recognize that the feeling of emotional dissatisfaction begins. We were feeling pretty good, and then we got offended, or the good time came to an end. In a little while we feel upset, or we hanker after some new way of enjoying ourselves. The fact that the arising of suffering can be noticed means that it arises from something other than suffering, and that there is something other than suffering that notices it. Whatever arises as a cause is created. Simply to recognize that suffering arises is the beginning of opening the mind to a deeper understanding. So also those 2 points is good to highlight there. Firstly, that if suffering arises, then there must have been a state of non-suffering before. When the suffering ends, what's present needs to be appreciated as well. And also, that which knows suffering isn't suffering. And this is, in a way, a key aspect of the development of wisdom, is that which knows agitation is not agitated. That which knows that which knows the feeling of being offended is not offended. That which knows the feeling of anger is not angry. It's knowing the feeling, but it's not identified with that feeling. The quality of awareness is intrinsically separate from the objects of awareness, and so that is a central feature for the whole process of liberation. If we neither contemplate suffering nor wish to understand it, suffering is not so noticeable. Instead of looking at it, we keep shifting away from it to absorb into something else. This is the birth habit I mentioned earlier. But what that causes is an underlying sense of dis-ease, denial, and even cynicism in the psyche. The get it while you can syndrome. A natural state of joy or contentment is considered impossible, and happiness arises only when we have our security, our creature comforts, our best friends. Then we say, I don't suffer, life is great. At such times, which we assume to be the norm, we easily forget our frequent disappointments and irritations, or try to ease the chafing of life with some balm of comfort or bluff heartiness. Ha ha ha! I'm fine. I'm fine. In the States, they talk about FINE as being an acronym for fed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. I'm fine. Oh yes. Also, we unconsciously assume that calamities won't occur, that our partner won't get run down by a truck, or that our child won't be crippled by a disease. Most incredible of all, something in us is shocked by death. We still feel that sickness, death, betrayals, breakdowns, and failures are an outrageous deviation from the smooth flow of life. This is what the Buddha called unknowing, or avijja. The mind's contraction to a level where the full range of birth's potential is not accepted. Although this avijja is a buffer that the psyche uses to protect itself from suffering, it actually drives the dukkha deeper into our hearts, affecting our ability to be open and easeful with life. So this is a very helpful way of expressing what our minds do, and that we feel like, I'm fine, I don't suffer. But what that means is I've got a really efficient system of avoiding dukkha, so that I can always change. I've got a really good a set of things, reliable system of stimulation and distraction stacked up, so I can stay feeling at that the endorphin level is kind of flowing my preferred rate, and I've got enough things when I'm not feeling when I'm feeling hungry. I've got the supply of food in the fridge, or when I'm full, I've got a place to have a nap. When I want to go out for a walk, I've got some nice all-weather walking gear. I've got a dog to take out. When I get back, then I've got a nice warm home to come back to, and we think, I'm fine, life is great, I don't suffer. What's the problem? What are they talking about? But if we think it through, and if we made a little table of all the things that we depend on during the course of a day, it can be quite revealing as how much stuff we depend on. Many years ago, I was at a conference with a meeting of Western Buddhist teachers with the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, and it was quite revealing how we went. I think it was in March, and the weather was damp and rainy and cold. And we got checked into our hotel, and someone said, I can't seem to get any heat in my room, and of course the guy behind the desk says, I'm terribly sorry, madam. The electricity's out. This is Dharamsala, McLeodganj. The power supply is not reliable. And she said, well, but you don't understand. Like my things are damp from the rain. I need to dry my things. I'm sorry, madam. You can hang them up and But no, I need to dry my things. And this person who's a very well-known and prominent Buddhist teacher, and well-regarded as an expert in meditation, she completely, well, I wouldn't say completely fell apart, that's an exaggeration, but she was severely distressed that she couldn't get her things dry, and that her room was not warm and was not warmable. That it was just, that there isn't a possibility of making this room warm at the moment. If you want to be warm, you have to go somewhere else, because this can't happen here. In your clothes, you're not going to get your clothes dried here. And just the sense of it was quite startling to me how just what you would think of as a tiny thing like that completely threw this person off balance. Like, had never in her whole life been in a situation where she couldn't be warm and dry, or couldn't have her things sort of comfortable clothes to put on, but it was just, no, it's cold and wet, and it's cold and wet. No, and there's nothing else you can do. So not to blame her, but it was really striking how someone who has been teaching and practicing meditation for years and decades, one little thing changes, one thing is not available, and suddenly they're thrown totally off balance. And she was really very distressed, right through until they managed to get the power on and work things out a bit. But still, it was very, I think we can all translate that into our own worlds, where something goes out of whack. We have an injury, or somebody lets us down, or something happens that makes our usual supply of distractions and comforts and reassurances not available. And then we discover, what's my refuge? And we are, introduced to the things that we're dependent on at those kind of times. And as he points out, that as he says, most incredible of all, something in us is shocked by death. We still feel that sickness, death, betrayals, and breakdowns of failures are an outrageous deviation from the smooth flow of life. So this is such a common theme. I mean, so many people come to visit here when their family members have died, loved ones and parents and children, and so that very grief-stricken. I was talking about this the other day, and so I'll often say, well, the Buddha encourages us to wake up to this, because I say, and I'll do it right now, everybody in this room is going to die one day. There's not a single person here who is going to be alive in 100 years' time, 150 years' time. Am I right? All these bodies are going to stop breathing within 100 years or so. Even the longest lived and the youngest of us will, even though they've got life extension programs, at least a couple of 100 years, where all these bodies will have stopped breathing. That's not news, right? But when I say everyone here is going to die one day, something in us goes, no, right? There's some mistake. Right? Isn't it crazy? It's absolutely crazy. But something in us says, no, that's not right. But it takes you 3 seconds to work through the logic, and yeah. But we have this forgettery. Well, this is the opposite of the memory. This forgettery that filters those things out. And said, no, it won't happen to me. It won't happen now. It won't happen. It's over there somewhere. And that's I think a very good expression. It's these kind of sickness and death. These are an outrageous deviation from the smooth flow of life. And we have this strange perception that we have the right to expect comfort, friendship, security, and a good food supply. With Jose in the kitchen, it's kind of very reliable. But we have this delusion that Jose is going to be there forever. We hope he'll be for at least a couple of decades, But in our own homes, in our own lives, we have this forgettery keeps filtering out these actualities of life. So this is why the Buddha encourages the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. I am of the nature to age, I am of the nature to sicken, I am of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide, supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. Now the Buddha was not a sadist. He was not just trying to just make fun of people or make us feel bad or depressed. But he's just like Ajahn Sucitto's pointing out here. It's like, wake up! This is the program that you're in the middle of, that you are a part of. That it's not a weird deviation that you get sick, or that you've tweaked your back, or that your partner's walked out on you. That's not anything going wrong. That's just how life is. It's not dependable. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise. You think, well, the Buddha was just working on guesswork there. I mean, he couldn't have known that was really the case. But understanding nature and seeing how things work, the Buddha saw all that has come together has to separate. That's a law of nature. Therefore, everything that is beloved and pleasing has to depart, has to end somehow. It's just the mathematics of nature. If it's come together, it has to separate. That's how things are. So he wasn't making particular predictions about our own personal lives. It's just, this is how it is for all people in all times. So, to bring those things to mind is not just to make ourselves depressed, but rather to develop a realism. Oh, right, of course. So that then we are able to look at that within us that pushes it away, to recognize that filtering and all that which makes us dependent and fearful that something's going to go wrong. I'm going to lose that which is precious. Oh no, I don't. Oh. And the Buddha's teaching helps us to turn towards that and say, what's there to be afraid of? This has always been the case. There's nothing to be afraid of. But that has to be seen by us as individuals. We have to turn and look ourselves, because it's not just a matter of having a reassuring words from a teacher outside. The Buddha saying, don't worry, there's nothing to fear. It's like we have to turn our hearts to that ourselves, to look and see what our dependencies are, and seeing them, then they can be let go of. If we don't see them, then they can't be let go of. So, to continue. For example, what happens when we try to recover from suffering? We often find something else to distract our minds, or perhaps we repress the pain. During a lifetime of many small disappointments, betrayals, threats, and the rest, We develop a tough skin over our sensitivity and a feeling that happiness is something that we have to seek out. Eventually, there is so much hide protecting the heart that the innate joy of being alive becomes inaccessible. Many layers of stiff upper lip. It gets leathery over time. Many people would not even guess that happiness is an innate state of being, independent of circumstances. The Buddha found that happiness in the purity of his heart, and called that innate purity of being the unconditioned. It is unconditioned because it is not dependent on conditions, and one who realizes that experiences nibbana, the highest happiness. So that's a very beautiful way of expressing that the realization of the unconditioned is that recognition, the realization, or the direct awakening to the heart's own nature. So as he says, the Buddha found that happiness in the purity of his heart and called that innate purity of being the unconditioned. But for the average person, happiness is dependent on circumstances. They don't see suffering because they've created the circumstances to avoid it. But the avoidance of suffering is not the cessation of suffering. Suffering remains a distinct possibility, and we take every step to prevent it. We tend to settle for guarded security. However, that too is suffering. The defensiveness and anxiety that someone might rob us or attack us, or that some insidious virus might be gnawing its way through our immune system. The average comfortable Westerner living with material adequacy is still always prone to anxiety. The possibility of losing one's partner, one's job, one's health, one's standing in the community, one's dignity or sense of well-being. When our happiness is dependent on a fragile tissue of circumstance, no one can afford to relax and be at ease. Societies where people have a lot of opportunities and possibilities for pleasure are generally frantic, anxious or neurotic. And people who depend on fortunate conditions for their happiness become quite selfish and deluded, refusing to accept that there might have to be some constraint on how they use the planet, their bodies or other people. The right to pursue one's own happiness easily gets distorted into the right to do whatever turns you on, no matter what the effects might be on others. The right to use as much of the earth's resources as one likes, to have whatever one wants immediately, and live a life of ever-renewing pleasure and vitality. Just as for an alcoholic, the gratification of desire only leads to more and more thirst, not to its quenching. That's the circle of fire, and it often begins with a pleasant, warm glow. So it's also interesting that often the most comfortable and secure societies are the ones where there's the greatest experience of depression, alcoholism, and suicide. So that this mysterious way, the safer the society, often places that are incredibly stable, like Scandinavian countries or New Zealand and such kind of benign and safe societies, in many respects, the level of depression is enormous, and often in countries where life is much more on the edge, where people are struggling to survive and find the necessities of life, you haven't got time to be depressed because you got to find water to the family. You've got to get some shelter and protect yourself from the kind of vicious elements that you're living with. So that it's a very pertinent point that he makes there. By our inability to relate and respond wisely to the downside of life, or even to accept that it might exist, we've taken dukkha deep into ourselves and buried it there, where it's difficult to extract. From not living in accordance with the changing rhythm of life, from experiencing it always to be bright and positive, from expecting it to be always bright and positive, we create a spectre that haunts the heart and affects the ways we view and live our lives. We make dukkha an ultimate truth that we run away from for as long as we can, by absorbing ourselves into the upside of the sensory world. But we can't commit ourselves for too long to any one thing because, like the waves of the sea, the sensory world has its downside. And remember, the sensory world is a lot more than beer and parties. Now we have all kinds of refined things to watch or taste, and the mind especially offers a vast potential for sensory enjoyment. There are so many things one can study. that this is hardly considered a sensory activity. But in the Buddhist analysis, it is. We delight in intriguing ideas, or in being aroused by tales of stirring adventure. Then again, one can alter one's consciousness completely with drugs. So the sensory world allows us to get absorbed into many states, into each of which we are propelled by karma or volition, and each is experienced as the arising of the 5 khandhas. They are births. We experience being born into the sensory realm. And since we do it over and over again, no birth satisfies us for very long. Also, I'm reminded of a story about speaking about the suffering of ownership and possession. As you said, the anxiety that someone might rob us, the anxiety that someone might rob us or attack us, and that how ownership of things might bring dukkha with it. Many years ago, when I was living here in the 80s, this a young couple of women came, young Thai women came, and it was in the days when this used to be a car park, where the cloister is now. It used to be where the cars parked outside the front of the sala, and it was after the meal time, and Luang Por Sumedho had gone, so I was receiving guests, and this bright red Mercedes pulled up outside, just outside the window, and these 2 young women came in, and so we were talking together, and they hadn't visited Amaravati before, and they were asking about the teachings and about meditation and so on, and we got onto this subject about desire and dukkha and how they were related. And so I said, and in Thailand, it's probably not the same now, but in those days, owning a Mercedes was the sort of lay equivalent of arahantship. It's like the ultimate happiness. Kind of It still is. That it's an absolute status symbol more than anything else, to own a Mercedes. And so, so I said, so say for example, this, here you are, you've come to England, you've been studying, you've gone to work, you've earned some money, you managed to buy yourselves a nice cherry red Mercedes, and you can take pictures of yourself by the car and say, "Hi, Mom, here we are, we made it, ta-da!" And you feel very happy. And they're saying, "Yeah, that's right, yeah, absolutely, yeah." They didn't actually take out the pictures. That was before the era of iPhones. But they said, "Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we were doing." I said, "So then, your Mercedes is a source of great happiness, right? So wow, this is great, and we've made it. New country, new life, success, happy, red Mercedes." So then I said, say for example, you park your car out on the street, and then some rowdies come out of a pub, and they see this Mercedes parked on the street, and they get out their keys, and they make a big long scratch all the way down the side. And so then you come out and you see your beautiful Mercedes with this big scratch. Somebody's keyed your car, and then you're suddenly that that delight of ownership and your happiness of owning the car then becomes a source of great suffering. Like, how can they do that? They ruined the car, and getting all upset. As I'm speaking in these terms, then one of the women starts to look a little embarrassed, and the other one starts giggling. And as I'm carrying on, or waxing lyrically on this theme, the one who starts giggling breaks out into kind of full-blown, kind of uncontrollable laughter, and actually fell over. She was laughing so much, which is very unusual for Thai people with a monk. They're usually far more restrained. But she was laughing so much, she literally fell over on the floor. And so this obviously brought the conversation to a bit of a pause. Oh. And she sort of sat up and she said, "You should have heard her in the car on the way up here, because that's just what happened last night." She said, "Yeah, she was turning she was swearing her head off at these people who'd ruined the car, and I was saying to her, you shouldn't be saying that stuff. We're on the way to the monastery. It's all kinds of bad karma you're creating." But she was just so angry and so upset about their car being ruined that she was turning the air blue on the way. And I'd said, look, I was not being psychic, just using that as a random example, but it was a very clear case in point how that which is a source of great delight, then you think, wow, I've got this wonderful thing. Then you got to keep it. You got to protect it. And Luang Por Chah used to tell the story of how when he went to visit the Sangaraja in Thailand one time, and the Sangaraja was telling him how when he made an official visit to China, they'd given him this antique porcelain teacup. It was very, very old and very delicate and very precious. And he said as soon as they gave it to him, he started worrying about it. And that whenever they were packing, going from the reception back to the hotel, and then packing their things, he kept wanting to check to see that his attendant had packed it all right, or was it being looked after, or was it not going to get bashed by anything? And all the way back on the plane, he was worrying about his teacup. And he said, finally, about a month or two after he got back, finally his attendant knocked it over and broke it. And he said, "Ah, thank goodness! Now I can stop worrying." Last is broken. Yeah. Okay, so we try to become something in order to feel that we are making progress. This is another kind of thirst. It is the desire for existing or becoming, quote unquote, as it is also translated. This means the desire for some position in the temporal or spatial world that consciousness projects. We feel ourselves to be immaterial things regarding experience, affected by it, even imperiled by it. And we seek to become in control of or able to understand and direct the life experience. Becoming is very powerful. We do things now so that we can be in a better situation in the future. We study in order to qualify for a good job, to have a stable family life, or to have love and security and an adequate supply of sensory happiness. This is reasonable enough, but it often entails overriding the experience of the present. People work themselves hard and become very stressed, chasing the dream of ease in the future, and the amount of stress that one undergoes in order to achieve one's goals makes it necessary to raise the expectations of what the future will provide. Certainly people do lie and cheat to get ahead, and after years of cheating and manipulating others, may feel disappointed that life doesn't live up to their expectations. How can it? There are the laws of cause and effect, karma vipaka, at work, and they operate according to the state of your intentions and actions. The way you act in the present determines how you're going to feel and the kind of situations you'll tend to find yourself with in the future. If you are an aggressive, unscrupulous go-getter, you'll associate with the kind of people who fit into that way of operating. Naturally enough, such companionship will reinforce the drive to get something in the future, and the stress. The aggressiveness comes back to your own mind and body, until you find yourself born into an untrustworthy circle of associates, an ulcer or a coronary. That's how becoming leads to birth. The process of becoming operates on a subtler level than big business competitiveness or desire for fame. The inner self, quote unquote, that is the experience of becoming, projects values and wishes onto everything. Notice when doing a mundane chore that the attitude is frequently one of wanting to get it done, wanting to have it finished in order to be peaceful, to relax, or to enjoy oneself. That too is dukkha. Rushing along to get to the next moment, we fail to open and appreciate this moment. The laws of karma are that if you operate in that way in this moment, the same momentum takes you through the next moment, colouring your awareness of the present with its moods and perceptions. You want to go to a show, so you hastily take a shower, change your clothes, abruptly cut off a friend who's just phoned, leap in the car, find out that you left the keys in your other jacket, rush back to the house, trip over the dog in the hallway. The scenario proceeds to the traffic jam, the lost temper, the minor accident, and then finding out that the show's been cancelled anyway. Which was what your friend was phoning you up to tell you. This is Ajahn Sucitto with his full Ebenezer Scrooge mode. Bar humbug. Just notice, a mind filled with desire does not appreciate anything. And most people hardly investigate the quality of the present moment because, as a sensory experience, it may be nothing special. However, to one who cultivates attention to the present, whatever form the present moment takes, the mind begins to reveal its treasures: sensitivity, joy, confidence, and serenity. When we get tired of running around in sensory stimulation, then the third kind of desire operates, the desire for extinction. So that previous kind of desire for becoming, is called bhava tanha. the desire for extinction. These terms are not to be taken as absolutes, they apply to mind movements that may be momentary only or vaguely perceived. Vibhava tanha is the desire to get rid of something or to get out of it all. This is often a repressive influence or simply an attitude of not wanting to be bothered. I don't want to see this. It's also a force in us that denies our pain and sorrow, or makes us want to annihilate ourselves in sleep, drugs, or with suicide. It often results from the other two forms of desire. If they are followed blindly, they leave us in states of mind that we dislike, and therefore avoid being aware of. So, we try to annihilate that awareness, even if it means destroying ourselves. What people don't realize is that vibhava tanha leads to birth too. Birth in a negative state of repression or self-denial in this world or in another life. These three motivating influences of desire continue to operate on subtler levels of activity too. Even with a spiritual inclination, the mind can be motivated by the desire to get out of it all, vibhava tanha. The desire for spiritual attainment can be a form of bhava tanha, desire to become, when it is to enhance one's self-image, even just in one's own eyes. This can actually hinder and bar progress towards purification of the mind by making one unwilling to fully understand the various unenlightened habits that one has to work through. So those of you who've spent much time listening to Lumpur Sumedho's teachings will know these bhava tanha and vibhava tanha are extremely common themes, and which also I tend to dwell upon, because these are, you can think of as a sort of meditator's disease, is the desire to get jhana, desire to become enlightened, or desire to get rid of my defilements, get rid of my chattering thoughts. And as Lumpur Sumedho will point out over and over again, so easily our noble intentions in spiritual practice get co-opted by bhava tanha, vibhava tanha. So then, just to finish this section, sense desire, kama tanha, in terms of spiritual aims, is the desire for refined and blissful states of mind to absorb into. Sit padded up with an elaborate system of cushions, so that you won't have to be aware of bodily feeling, in a retreat center where nobody bothers you, and there's no untoward sensory impingement. Then, use a meditation technique that gets you into a state of absorption and cruise on refined mind states for a while. This doesn't always work for Westerners who have such overstimulated minds that to get them to quieten down through withdrawal often requires such manipulation and stressful effort that it is self-defeating. Being thwarted in this way, they then have the chance to develop insight into the Four Noble Truths by investigating suffering and realizing the wisdom that goes beyond desire. The mind moves extremely fast, and desire creates so much movement that it's difficult to see what is really going on. Sometimes desires augment each other. You want to become something so that you will have more happiness on the sensory plane. You want to get rid of your habits so that you'll become a more productive human being. You would like to have a really comfortable meditation cushion so that you can become a wiser, more compassionate being. Sometimes they fight with each other. I want to get rid of my disgusting sensual appetites, or maybe I should get into beer and TV to get rid of my attachment to purity, and show that I'm not obsessed with becoming enlightened, and so on. I want. This is the way it is. Such is the promotion of suffering. Notice that the Buddha makes no moral judgment here. He does not tell you not to be this way, or to cut it out. In fact, he doesn't say that you are that way. He just says that there are these energies at work. Remember, the First Noble Truth points to the suffering which arises from grasping existence in terms of self. As soon as you start saying you are this way and you should be another way, self-desire has slipped into the mind. So the language of the Buddha's teachings is deliberately impersonal. This way, we don't get ashamed or defensive and have the encouragement to investigate the way things are in a more open and objective light. So it's then to go back to that, the framework for this whole process. What I like to emphasize is how as long as our spiritual efforts are wound up with self-view, like me trying to get somewhere, me trying to get concentrated, me trying to get rid of my distracted thoughts, me trying to get rid of my unsavory desires and aversions, that as long as that self-view is in the picture, then you can be sure. That's the clear sign, that's the flag that says bhavatanha vibhavatanha. And even though we might put a lot of effort in with great noble intentions, as long as it's based on that, on self-view, then the result is going to be dukkha. And as Luang Por Sumedho put it, if you start off with ignorance, you end up with dukkha. If you start out with self-view, the result has to be unsatisfactoriness. But if instead that we are aware of that process, we're aware that how easy it is to slip into bhavatanha vibhavatanha, if there's an alertness to that, then as that is recognized, oh, there's me trying to get that state. That's what's happening here. The mind is framing it up. I want that beautiful state. That's what I want, because it's a good state. That to say, that's me wanting to become other. Me who's creating a me here, who wants to get hold of that, so it'll be a me with that good thing. And to be able to see that framework being created, that conceiving, it's called manyati, the conceiving or making the making of the I feeling, then that's seen through wisdom, then it can be let go of. And so then what's necessary for those wholesome states to arise can be cultivated, but without the sense of I want to get, or I haven't got and I need to be that way in order to be happy. So that right effort, or samma vayamo, that effort is being expended, where there's effort being made, but it's based upon mindfulness and wisdom. It's not based upon self-view. So that's in a way going back to the distinction between chanda, that sort of spiritual, and say Dhamma chanda, the spiritual enthusiasm or the interest, zeal or zest. That's the necessary primary condition. That is it's completely different from tanha, where we're craving to get something that we want. So that as the way that the Luang Por Sumedho would frame it with, if you start off with vicca, if you start off with wisdom, then the result is nibbana. The result is realization, is freedom. If you start off with avijja, then the result is dukkha. So it's a really easy way to kind of package it. Start off with avijja, end up with dukkha. Start off with vicca, you end up with nibbana. So, I think that's enough from me. So any particular questions or clarifications people would like, please. As usual, don't be shy.
I would like to say something, but I don't know, or ask something. I don't know quite how to phrase it. Recently I recognized that I take some delight in really acknowledging what is happening and not trying to be better than, trying to cover it over with always trying to improve, so I got so, fed up with the tension of trying to improve that I started to sit back and just look, what kind of self-view is actually happening right now, and feel the pain of it right away.
The pain of?
This self-view and whatever is kind of hidden, there. And to my surprise, I feel really comfortable with it.
That shouldn't be a surprise.
It's something so familiar. Yeah. It's really to actually, comfortable is not the right word. It's more the acknowledging of it feels as if it's the healing is starting with that. So I don't want to get the wrong phrase because that would miss the point. But really it is really painful. If I sit in meditation and something has happened, in my mind. I should meditate here.
Yeah, that's very good.
And what is the feeling here? The heart,
Well, Luang Por Sumedho said he used to, and I really took this to heart. He said when he get in his early years at Wat Pah Pong, he gets so wrapped up in trying to be the perfect monk and trying to get his practice together and trying to develop samadhi. He just every so often he would just forbid himself to meditate. He'd just sit on the veranda of his kuti and look at the squirrels, and he did it deliberately to listen to that voice in his mind saying, but Sumedho, you should be meditating. You shouldn't just be sitting here watching the squirrels. You should meditate, Sumedho. Just to hear that nagging voice saying, you should. And he had enough wisdom to be able to. No, that's really important to know that, and not just to be subjugated by that and dominated by that voice. Because it's like addressing ourselves in that way. To some degree, it's like going up to a tree and saying, "You need to improve yourself." Like you're not doing very well. As an oak tree, you could do better. Well, you're totally at liberty to go and talk to a tree like that. But, one can take that to an extreme, and then it turns into being a kind of passivity where there's useful and appropriate things that could be done and not being done, because you've sort of grasped the idea of I'm practicing not doing, and so in a way you're then freezing the natural responsivity. But the point is to learn to listen to that compulsive you should, and to just let the system relax in its wakefulness.
I mean, what I can feel is that the fruit of it is that with this relaxing, it's just as if things are moving a little bit away from you, and there's more the resting and the knowing happening, because there's less identification with what is happening and trying to check it. So, and yeah, that is really the part which is comfortable and becomes comfortable is maybe also not the right word, but is without suffering, and a kind of refuge. So I find it just interesting that in a way I know all of this, but in trying to get there.
Yeah, the mind creates obstacles. Yeah.
It may work for a little bit and then you lose it again, and so it goes back and forth. But this kind of watching the squirrels, just, anyway, so I for me that fits very well with this chapter, with always trying to avoid the notion of the suffering.
Yeah, that urge to do something with it, and not realizing that the me who's got to do something with it is continuing to create it. So and it makes you appreciate why the Buddha had this feeling. There's no point trying to explain this to anybody. That it's too subtle, because there's this need for acute attention, but without a sense of doing, without that me trying to become something, and that blend of qualities of yes, something needs to be done, but if there's somebody there trying to do it, then it's always going to be getting in the way. That's the first fetter, the first obstacle, the first thing tying the mind down is me trying to do something to get somewhere. So it's a subtle process, but these teachings are so helpful in that respect, because also it relates a bit to the third noble truth, which we'll get onto. We've got a whole chunk of dependent origination yet, but in the third noble truth, when the method of working with the third truth, dukkha nirodha, is sachikata bhanti. It needs to be realized. It's to be realized, to be awakened to. So, in a way, what you're describing is that sachikata bhanti, sachikatanti, that it's recognizing. Oh, this is when the mind stops that self-creating. Well, this is different. That direct realizing of the mind free of dukkha, and training the attention to stay with that spaciousness and peacefulness. That's in a way, the development of the third noble truth is training the attention to stay with the absence of dukkha, to stay with spaciousness and clarity, and not to follow the habit of looking for the next thing. Continuing the chapter called Getting Burned, on the second noble truth, we come to the section on what Ajahn Sucitto has called the ring of fire, dependent origination, and as the book, the great book, and the other copies are circling around. So this is the depiction of the ring of fire, Ajahn Sucitto's marvelously graphic rendering of dependent origination, burning, burning, burning. And so that you can pass that around and have a look. There's quite a few references to his images around the edge of the burning circle, so that's what are being referred to when he talks about the particular vignettes or single images. So before I begin with this section, I thought I'd also mention this book called, predictably, Dependent Origination, by Venerable Payutto. And so this, I would say, is the best book in the English language on the Buddha's teaching about dependent origination, and is very accessible and well translated and very reliable and useful as a practical guide. So we have many, many copies in the library. You can see our trusty librarian nodding vigorously, and so I do recommend that if you can't follow what I'm saying today, either go back to this book of Ajahn Sucitto's, or look at this one from Tanchakun Payutto. So, the ring of fire. The outer rim of this picture contains various figures bound up in loops of fire, mapping out the compounding of dukkha. These emblems represent 12 linking factors of an analysis called dependent origination, or paticca samuppada in Pali. Just as studying the cause of suffering is helpful, as it will lead to understanding what we have to do or not to do, dependent origination provides many insights into the origin and cessation of suffering. It is a profound analysis whose terms and connections may seem baffling at first sight. Accordingly, I have drawn up a table for reference and recommend reviewing and reflecting on it while looking at the illustration. So here's his table, neatly arranged. In the picture, the interlinking motif represents another example of these vicious circles. With the first noble truth, the previous circle, the grasped aggregates reinforce and support each other. It was a chain. The experience of grasping and suffering, really two ways of looking at the same thing, are the force of torsion that creates those doubled loops. Torsion is a kind of tension between things. In the second truth, there is also a double-sided force, ignorance and desire. The interconnectedness of the loops points to the fact that in dependent origination, each factor supports every other factor. Nor is the connection of one a simple causal sequence. Each factor that is described is present in every subsequently described factor, and the analysis is one of conditionality rather than causality. Just as water is a condition for ice, the absence of clouds a condition for a sunny day, Having ears, a condition for enjoying Bach fugues. So, the conditionality of dependent origination is the structure of the potential for dukkha or its cessation. The essential point in this is that conditions arise in the present and can therefore be changed. Causes, on the other hand, are historical. So, causes from the past and conditions arise in the present qualities. So a few things to mention there before going much further. Many of you will have seen the traditional renderings of what's called the Bhava Chakra, or the wheel of birth and death. You have a circular figure, and it's held in the grip of a large demonic figure, that is Mahakala, which means great time. And that figure has the 5 or the 6 realms depicted as a sort of basic division at the central part of it. And at the very core you have greed, hatred and delusion, represented by the pig, the snake and the rooster, usually with each other's tail in their mouths at the very heart of that. Around the edge of the either the 5 realms or the 6 realms, depending whether the asuras get mentioned, the jealous gods, you have the same system of 12 images that Ajahn Sucitto has used here. So his depiction in this graphic of his is very much following that traditional Bhava Chakra, or the wheel of birth and death, as sort of held within the grip of Mahakala. So I'm sure many of you have seen and noticed those images. And that image of the Bhava Chakra, the wheel of birth and death, seems to have been in existence within Buddhist tradition from very, very early times. It's not within the Theravada tradition, but within, I think, the Tibetan texts. They speak of it originally having been designed by Mahamoggallana himself, because he was so adept at visiting different realms of existence. He, in order to sort of portray what the different realms are like, the heavenly realms and the hell realms, the hungry ghost realms, the realms of the jealous gods, and as well as the immediately visible ones of the human realm and the animal realm, that it was Mahamoggallana who said, well, look, let me paint you a picture and I'll show you what it's like. So that tradition has it that it was right from the very earliest times, and it's also one of those images that you find throughout the Buddhist world. So it's not just in the northern Buddhist world of Tibet or China, Japan, but you find it in the Theravada countries in very, very similar forms. So it's an almost universal image. The next thing to say about, and Ajahn Sucitto describes it quite well here, is when we recite the teaching on dependent origination, the words go avicca pacaya sankara, sankara pacaya vinyanang, vinyanang pacaya namarupang. So this word pacaya means conditioned. So oftentimes when you read it, or you read about it, or hear about it, it can be presented or represented as saying, A causes B, B causes C, C causes D, and so they use a term like a causal chain, and so that is overly simplistic and basically inaccurate, because the word pacaya just means condition, and as he describes here, water is a condition for ice, but you need to have the water there for ice to appear, but you can't have ice without water, but there's other factors involved as well. Or having ears is a condition for enjoying Bach fugues. So another of the chants that we do is called the conditional relations, and it describes when we do it when we as a part of the funeral chanting, as we do with the dependent origination. And it lists what are called the 24 conditional relations, hetu pachayo, aramana pachayo, the root condition, and so forth. And those 24, I won't go into all of this in any detail, and I'm certainly not skilled in this whole area of Buddhist analysis, but you have 24 different ways that A can relate to B. So when it says pachaya, that connection of A relating to B can be any one of 24 different ways, and so that the fact that A is related to B, it can mean that A is a direct cause of B, or it can mean that A and B arise together, or that the fact that water is in the ground, if you dig a hole, you will reach water in the ground. Your digging does not create the water, but you can't get to the water without the digging. So there's a causal relationship, but the A does not create B. The B is already there, but you can't get to B without A, and so on. This is the area of Abhidhamma, which is dense and intricate, and won't go into here, but just so that people get a general idea of, when we talk about dependent origination, that the relationships between the different factors, it's not a simple A causes B, B causes C, but they have these different nuances and different kinds of way that they affect each other. One of the other things that that is very very helpfully articulated in this book, in a passage, it's called a problem with the word Nirodha. I probably cannot find it. It's in the appendix.
The appendix A or B.
Whereas, probably appendix A, yeah. Yeah, here we are. Very good. Page 106. A problem with the word Nirodha, being cessation, and I'll get onto that a little bit later. But when you're looking at this dependent origination cycle, and it says when ignorance ceases, then sankharas cease. When avijja ceases, then sankhara ceases. The cessation, in English, it means something that has started is then stopped. It has been happening and now it's come to an end. So we use the word cessation. But the word nirodha can also mean the non-arising of. So, like when you say if there is the non-arising of ignorance, then there is the non-arising of conditioned formations, volitional formations. So that it's not that when ignorance ceases, then the sankhara ceases, or when sankhara ceases, consciousness ceases. But it also means if that doesn't arise, then these things don't arise either. So anyway, I'll leave that till later. So then Ajahn Sucitto starts to speak about the images, and the first one, ignorance, and the image is of a person holding the hand over their eyes. Right at the top is ignorance, avijja, the man with his hand in front of his eyes. People tend to take ignorance, quote unquote, as pejorative. However, it refers to a lack of gnosis, Gnosis, which is the word Gnostic, and also the Pali word jnana for knowledge is related to the Greek word gnosis, and meaning insightful seeing, as well as to foolishness and unknowing. It is summarized as not understanding the Four Noble Truths, or perhaps more accurately, not understanding their implications. That is, as long as there is ignorance, the mind still expects to find an experience that is completely satisfying and feels disappointed when things, quote, go wrong, unquote. There's a parable of a man eating a bag of chili peppers one by one, weeping at their fiery taste as he does so. This is a Mullah Nasruddin story. And so that they see Mullah Nasruddin sitting there, tears streaming down his face with a bag of chili peppers, eating one after another. When asked why he continues to eat the peppers, he replies, "I'm looking for the sweet one." This is ignorance. Might be very endearing, but also, again, the English word ignorance usually means not having the information, not being aware of some particular, say, a way something is done. Like, I'm ignorant of how to make a good souffle. I don't have the information, I don't have the knowledge. But the Buddhist word avijja in a way, it's technically correct. Like there is not any knowing, but also the maybe the English word unknowing, or nascience is another word that is more accurate, because it's, in a way, it's a lack of awareness rather than not having the information. It's like a not seeing clearly, not being fully aware, not being fully awake, rather than not having the information. So someone can still not know how to make a souffle, but they can be their heart can be totally free of avijja. They can have full awareness, but not have the information about some particular activity or practicality. The Buddha said that it's impossible to find the origins of ignorance. However, with experience, one can see that it is increased by willfully ignoring the way life is, and substituting instead wishful fantasies based on the viewpoint of a self imagined to exist within the 5 khandhas. Dependent origination teaches that this view, its origins, purposes, and results, can be seen as dependent on many factors, all with ignorance as their foundation. The cycle of dependent origination works both ways. With the arising of ignorance and the acting on that, suffering follows. With the ending of ignorance is the ending of every kind of inner pain, shadow, or stress. The uplifting aspect of dependent origination is that it brings the ending of dukkha down to one practice, that of replacing ignorance with wise attention. And as I think I was saying yesterday, Luang Por Sumedho summarized this in a very neat formula. If you start out with ignorance, with avijja, you end up with dukkha. If you start out with vicca, with awareness, then you end up with nibbana. So you can put that on your fridge, bumper sticker. There will be forthcoming, I'm sure. So ignorance is a mental inclination of ignoring. It's not just a passive quality, although it may occur through a programmed impulse rather than a clearly conscious choice. If it were not something that was inclined towards, there would be no way of stopping it. However, a lot of the time one is not conscious of ignorance. One thing about ignorance is that one is often ignorant of it. Important point. Reactions appear to happen automatically, without the awareness of where the motivation lies. When awareness is not developed to the point of knowing the mind, the automatic, quote-unquote, and reflex, quote-unquote, operations of our mind create the reality of our world. The inclination to not notice, to ignore, arises dependent on dukkha. We don't want to know about things not fitting in with our wishes, although there's no reason to assume that life should or could ever be the way we'd like it to be. So, ignorance affects our perceptions, the way we see things. If we're honest, we may notice prejudices, errors of judgment, definite biases towards seeing things my way. Also, ignorance distracts. What one doesn't want to know about is ignored. One's mind filters out flaws in a loved one's behavior, for example. Sometimes it's more conscious. They say the captain of the ocean liner, the Titanic, was informed of icebergs floating in the sea in front of his ship, yet chose to ignore the warning and went straight into them, with the resultant death of almost everybody on board. He was busy making a record-breaking crossing of the Atlantic and didn't want these pesky icebergs to interrupt his achievement, so they say, allegedly. Notice that there was an element of choice in the matter. Many accidents are caused by people not being attentive, thinking about something else with a chainsaw in their hand, doing things automatically, and that inattention is due to our minds wanting to be somewhere else. Sometimes ignorance is deliberate and willful. Sometimes it could be prevented by being more attentive. Sometimes it's ingrained in the ways we perceive things and requires insight and the courage to undergo personal change to remedy. However, ignorance is always activated by some element of conscious or unconscious desire. Therefore, ignorance and desire are the axis which allows the wheel of fire to spin. So, tanha, and you have this expression that you come across regularly in the suttas, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. So that those two, tanha and avijja, are like a grim partnership. Also, one other point on this about as he says, one thing about ignorance is that one is often ignorant of it. Oftentimes people say in this respect, well, how are you supposed to be able to approach or work with greed, hatred, and delusion? Greed and hatred are very easy to see; they're very vivid and highly apparent. There's sort of greed, I want more, or hatred, I can't stand, I've got to get away from, I've got to get rid of it. So greed and hatred are quite visible, but moha or delusion, or in this respect, ignorance, which is the root of moha. How do you see delusion? How do you see ignorance? Because the very means whereby you would see it is not available to you. It's like it's dark, so you can't see because it's dark. So that oftentimes when people ask about this, my response is to say, well, this is where spiritual friendship comes in. This is where your friends and your companions will say, "Do you realize what you're doing?" Or that's a rather strange thought. Or do you really believe that? And it's through our companions in the spiritual path that we have that light, say, turned on for us, so we recognize, oh, I'm not seeing clearly, or I'm really no wonder I'm bumping into things. I'm in the dark here, and we are more able to reach for the light. So continuing, as long as there is ignorance, actions tend to become automatic, compulsive, idiosyncratic, related to my way of seeing things, rather than to the needs of a situation. Ignorance, therefore, is linked to volitional or karma-productive tendencies, or sankhara, which includes activities of body, speech, or mind. Sankhara are here symbolized by the hand brandishing the hammer at the forge of creation, so like a blacksmith wielding a hammer. Also, sankhara means it comes from the root of to make or to compound or to put things together. So you have the hand holding a hammer, beating something into existence on the anvil of creation. We're always creating. When we speak, we create ourselves in another person's mind, and so it is with our actions. Ignorance conditions actions and makes them into activities of a self. When there is ignorance, we act, consciously or unconsciously, in order to prove ourselves or enhance ourselves. We also measure actions and speech in terms of self. We expect results, progress for ourselves or others we have identified with. We defend and justify our actions or assign to them a significance that they may not have. Alternatively, we may be highly self-critical. The self-view of sankhara means that we fail to measure the true worth or effect of actions and thoughts. Thereby it strengthens the habit of acting in unreflective ways. We do not clearly notice the motivation behind action, or the impersonal and changing natures of the energies and perceptions that feed them. Action becomes habitual activity and starts to form our identity. Do you find that your life has repeating patterns in it, similar scenarios with different people involved? We seem to go through the same emotional cycles around different events and have recurring patterns of thought, the same memories, the same habits, so we think, that's the way I am. Habitual activities, even thoughts in the mind, are elements which forge the karma, the self-defining and binding activities that shape our lives. Any identity, good or bad, is subject to stress, frustration, sorrow and death. If the karma is unskillful, there are a lot more problems on the way, such as guilt, fear and the hostility of others. Then we act in ways to cover up or redress previous actions, again acting from self-view. Thus more karma is established, strengthening the sense of identity, good or bad. This is the proliferating effect of sankhara. It's only when we understand motivation as coming from energies such as greed or love, rather than an existing self, that we find the still point of reflection and pull out of the spin. That freedom gives us the opportunity to act and speak in an unbiased way, in the way of Dhamma, rather than sankhara. So also another way of relating to sankhara, again, around its sort of the sense of things being compounded or brought together. It's like when there is ignorance, when the mind does not see clearly, then it creates the basic seed of subject-object duality. So a sense of a me here and a world out there, here and an object there. There's a me here and a world there. And that, so sankhara is also called the compounded things or conditioned things. And that compoundedness can be seen in that duality of self and other. So then the next one is vijnana. The sixfold sense consciousness is the agent through which sankharas manifest. This is the next link, symbolized by the monkey in the third loop. Ajahn Sucitto is very big on monkeys. So here we have it's the little monkey sitting there, representing the vijnana. Dependent upon habits, reflexes and viewpoints that have been created, the monkey jumps. Seeing, hearing, thinking, tasting, smelling, and touching are sent running around this way and that. Consciousness is based upon the 6 sense organs, and described as eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on. It can also be defined in terms of how it is propelled. Interest and attraction towards a sense object is consciousness rooted in greed. Generosity is a consciousness rooted in non-greed. Aversion to a sense object is consciousness rooted in hatred. Love is the opposite. Mind consciousness may experience a lot of confused, wavering activities around its sense objects of thought and emotion. This is consciousness rooted in delusion. Consciousness may be refined to varying degrees, from just above coma to sleep, wakefulness, caffeinated highs, alcoholic wooziness, ecstasy, or the refined absorptive states arising through concentration. For liberation from suffering and enlightenment, the Buddha stipulated that the mental consciousness should be unclouded and attentive, and that the quality of intention should be known and trained. It is intention that directs the monkey. There's a passage from the Samyutta Nikaya. Bhikkhus, whatever we determine, whatever we intend to do, and whatever we are occupied with, this is the base for consciousness to be maintained on. Intention, cetana, and sustained attention, manasikara, produce the experience of conscious motivation. Motivation in terms of greed or hatred or confusion will send consciousness deeper into those realms. Motivation in terms of giving and love and intelligence will incline consciousness towards more positive states. This is how karmic tendencies are strengthened. However, good or bad motivation in terms of self will always heighten that sense of self and the inevitable dukkha which that entails. So that's saying even if you have a wholesome intention of developing love or kindness, generosity, compassion, if that's based on self-view, then that will also entail dukkha as its final result, as I've been emphasizing. Consciousness always works in terms of name and form, nama-rupa, which is the next section. Something only has presence, i.e. enters consciousness, because there is a sense of contact. And contact depends on something contacted, form. From that contact, designations, feelings and perception, nama, arise. Nama is defined as feeling, perception, contact, intention, and attention. The neutral factors that pick up, define, locate, and react to the data of consciousness. Even formlessness is a designation of a kind of indefinite form. So the world of form only has presence for us because of consciousness, and how we perceive it is very much affected by the mind states, attitudes and feelings that we have. There is a saying that when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he notices are the saint's pockets, if he has any, of course, or she. When an architect or a builder sees a house, a different set of perceptions arises than when a homeless person sees it, or a burglar, or an animal. In a way, we build our own world, and our world builds us. What we are conscious of molds and determines the perceptions and attitudes we have. If you were attacked by a dog when you were a child, you probably will have some difficulty in perceiving dogs as loyal friends. So this is very true. Many years ago, when we first were renovating Chithurst House back in the early 80s, we were the roof was very broken down, and lots of old worn out tiles and holes in the roof. So we were replacing, and then the roof timbers had lots of dry rot in them. So we were replacing the whole roof, and we had professional roofers to do all the felting and battening and tiling. But the monastic community, we did a lot of the other work around the edges, including the gutters, and I was the gutter snipe. That was my job was to do the gutters, and so during this summer, I think it was 1982, we were doing the roof there, and so I spent many weeks clambering around the scaffolding and putting in these plastic gutters and joining them up and learning how all the different pieces work together and cutting them to size. So I spent weeks and weeks and weeks focused on the gutters at Chithurst and getting the levels just right. And so, of course, whenever I went away from the monastery, all I started to notice everywhere I went was gutters. I said, "Oh, there's cast iron ones. Oh, how do they connect that hopper to the downpipe?" And so I was seeing gutters everywhere I went. And also about dogs. My parents were both dog breeders, so I grew up with a house full of dogs. So whenever I meet a dog, wherever, dog equals friend, because I grew up in a dog-loving house. And not everybody has that experience. The thing that most profoundly affects consciousness, with whose rhythms and energies we are very much engaged, is the body. To be present in the sensory realm requires a physical body which has its needs, pleasant and painful feelings, its sickness and death. So, consciousness depends on and directs physical form, and is infused with attitudes and perceptions about it. Hence the fourth vignette, the body, is the connecting point for consciousness in the human world. So, let's go back to So that's just... And Ajahn Sucitto seems to be very male-oriented. All all the figures in his pictures are masculine, and all the people in his stories and examples are masculine. He does actually have a strong connection with the nuns community and the women of the world, but they don't kind of come through his writing very much. As most of his examples about sensual indulgence sort of hark back to his student days, and it's most about beer and parties. Is his sort of the immediate sort of go-to image for having fun. So since he kind of came out of university, and after a brief time as a wandering hippie, then he became a monk. So these, speaking of perceptions that get formed into our worldview, then Ajahn Sucitto has his own particular patterns. So anyway, the fourth vignette is a bloke. A kind of a bloke just sitting there, and then the fifth vignette symbolizes the five external senses that relay information to the mind. So you have this sort of a six-pointed kind of star with a question mark in the middle. The fifth vignette symbolizes the five external senses that relay information to the mind. The sixth vignette is of contact, the connection that is necessary for consciousness and its images to arise. So that contact is a it's an electrical plug, through a 3-pin plug, and then two hands meeting finger to finger, and a light bulb. So it's a very interesting relationship to electricity. And so the sort of contact from finger to finger, symbolizing the completion of the circuit and the light coming on. So that's his image for passa, or contact. So let's... In the human birth, consciousness is programmed by bodily life. It constantly registers the pain that is a warning of injury to the body, and pleasure that is a signal for the preservation and development of the body. But the body inevitably experiences degeneration and death, making pain unavoidable, and pleasure ultimately futile. When there's ignorance, consciousness remains fettered to this sensory realm, because the dependent link is not seen as biological or purely a matter of how the system works. It's felt as me. I appear to be a mental consciousness within a physical form, trying to seek solutions or remedies to it, or get as much agreeable experience as possible. Even if I am trying to get out of the physical form into some deathless or ethereal realm, I am always designated in terms of bodily presence or absence because of consciousness affected by self-view, being attuned to bodily life. Consciousness is dependent on the body for a lifetime, so no matter how ethereal the mind state, you still have to attend to the coarse functions of the body and be with its pains, its insatiable needs, and its demise. The I am view associated with the body is always one of need, anxiety, or pain. However, when one key, log, the sense of I, is removed from this pile of dukkha, bodily life becomes an opportunity for bringing wisdom and compassion into the world. In the vignette of the six senses, Salayatana, depicted by the arrows and the central question, I've tried to illustrate what is the one direction of Buddhist mind training. Sense consciousness normally takes us out, towards objects, or to thinking about what we can contact through the physical senses. However, in developing mindfulness, attention can be trained to look back into the mind, to focus on the intentions and reactions that govern conscious thought, speech and action, so that you have this image of these sort of six different things pointing in from different directions and a question mark in the center. When you see something, you are aware of the seeing and you reflect, how am I seeing that? If you're thinking or feeling something, rather than just acting upon it impulsively, you reflect, how do I react to that? This is a way you can learn about what is skillful or harmful, what the attachments and compulsions are, and where the sense of identity is being created. It's a way to investigate who we are, beyond our fluctuating and unsatisfactory identity. Who is the one who can freely contemplate the sensory world? There is always an awareness of something in the domain of consciousness, even if it's the feeling of confusion, suffering or desire. But awareness has no personal identity. The simple equation is that truth has no personal identity, and personal identity has no truth. Another way of representing that, when this area is being talked about, is we have this feeling of I am stuck in a prison. I'm limited. I'm bound. So there's this feeling of I want freedom, and I want to break free from the prison of these limitations of the body and the mind, the personality, the world. But the irony, the painful irony, is that I can never be free. The person can never be free because we don't realize that it's actually the person that is the prison. And as Ajahn Sucitto articulates here, it's when we can get that particular log, the sense of I is removed. When the I is taken out of the picture, then freedom is possible. So, and an easy way to remember is it's like the bars of the prison is I. It works very well. It doesn't really work very well in French or German or other languages, but it's very neat in English. So to continue, and I realize this is pretty dense stuff, speaking of dukkha and ignorance, but we'll continue, and I won't try and get through the whole lot today, but let's just go up to the next couple of sections. We can continue this chain through contact, phassa. That's the way that the senses operate. Apart from the physical needs and use of having contact, the inferred self needs contact to maintain its presence. Self always exists in contrast to otherness. We get bored with the same old tastes, sounds, sights, people, but then sometimes it's nice to have the familiar. Can't live with you, can't live without you. Sounds familiar? If you really want to contact the forms of your psyche, you could try floating in a sensory deprivation tank, or, more simply, sit where it's quiet and close your eyes. The natural inclination of the senses to make contact will bring up mental phenomena. For unenlightened beings, these will all be taken as aspects of themselves, and therefore unsatisfactory. However, the practice of sitting quietly with the eyes closed in meditation is useful in that, with steady attention, one realizes that all this stuff is something that can be watched, and is therefore a series of objects, not the subject, not a self. We only experience contact because of feeling and perceiving something, and as what is felt or perceived must always be an object, how can we ever contact our true self? Hence, contact affected by ignorance is the launching pad for need or disappointment. From this contact arise the futile attempts to find ourselves or connect with our true feelings. Yet contact itself does not have to be dukkha. When there's no ignorance or self-view, contact provides opportunities for attention, insight, and sharing. Contact links up with feeling, Vedana, and with characteristic Ajahn Sucitto-esque gruesomeness, the image for feeling is an arrow in the eye. Like King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, getting an arrow in the eye. Contact links up to feeling, the arrow in the eye. Something strikes visual consciousness and a feeling arises which is either painful, pleasant, or neutral. It is said that the body only experiences painful and pleasant feeling, the eye, ear, nose, and tongue only experience neutral feeling, and the mind experiences all three. However, as the mind will interpret neutrality as pleasant, calm at some times, and painful, tedious or dull at other times, in normal consciousness one is dealing with mental feelings based on perceptions. For instance, people can derive pleasure from doing extremely stressful things to their bodies. It's a real problem that the mind's values, sanya, can get so distorted that we actually derive pleasure from bragging, abusing, and fighting, even though these are abrasive and violent feelings in mind consciousness. Powerful emotional pleasure may arise out of being attractive, even though attractiveness can be stressful in terms of cost, artifice, and competition, and quite dangerous if you attract the wrong kind of person. Then there are the feelings associated with winning, being excited, and so on. The pleasure of these feelings is not due to the mind as a sense organ, which may even crack up under the strain, but to confused perceptions. The most consistent determinant for feeling is whatever sensation or perception makes me feel important, sensitive, or powerful. When there is ignorance or unknowing, we don't really know what we are feeling. As I've suggested above, much of the time we're in contact with our perceptions because they can create images in accordance with desire. Such is the next loop of fire, craving, which is tanha in its fully conscious form. Here it's represented by the thirsting mouth and the hand always reaching out to get water from a perceived mirage. That's the image of Tantalus from another sort of slightly glassy-eyed bloke, like Tantalus, who was chained up to a rock in a lake, but the water was always just below his chin. So no matter how he tried to reach down to the water always sank down low. And when he leaned back, then the water would rise up. So that's where we get the English word tantalizing from. It's from Tantalus, who was a character out of the Greek myths, who had annoyed the gods for various causes. So, when there is ignorance or unknowing, we don't. So, such is the next loop of fire, craving, which is tanha in its fully conscious form. Here, it's represented by the thirsting mouth and the hand always reaching out to get water from a perceived mirage. Feeling links to desire. If what is felt through the senses is not desirable or brings up aversion, the unawakened instinct creates a fantasy that is attractive. One of the bitterest aspects of the unawakened life is that when you have enough physically, your mind creates fantasies to crave. Nowadays, in Western culture, our normal reality is composed of fantasies vividly portrayed on television, in movies, novels, shows, and advertisements. This is pre-internet. So little did he realize what was coming down the road. Pre-internet, pre-iPhone. Man, you should have, maybe you should have a little footnote for the 2015 edition. Yeah, you ain't seen nothing yet, Ajahn. They seem harmless enough, but the contact with them and the feelings they induce unconsciously affect our values. People end up voting for a fantasy, being governed by a fantasy, using fantasy money, having fantasy enemies, and chasing fantasy goals. The only real element left is suffering, but that is repressed or not acknowledged because it doesn't fit into the fantasy. In the brave new world, everybody's happy, ignore the rest. Without ignorance, desire is not suffering. We can understand desire. It is something that we can watch in order to know its ethical quality. We can act on skillful desires with dispassion. We can respond to the signals of bodily need, and we can let go of desires that are born from greed, hatred, or delusion. Then we're not acting in ignorance, and we can use the energy of desire to investigate the mind and bring goodness into the world. Another aspect of this whole process, and in the Thai forest tradition, is one of the most common themes when talking about dependent origination, is that the weakest link in the whole causal process is seen to be between feeling and craving. This link of Vedana and Tanha. That up to that point, that the whole process works so subtly and so quickly that, in a sense, before we know it, there is the sense of a me here and a world out there, and me running away from the things that are frightening, or contending against the things that are disliked, or chasing after the things that are liked. And so that in a way the potency of ignorance is such that we kind of don't really come to until we hit the realm of feeling, that the senses are operating, and the feeling of me here and the world out there, it's already up and running. And so that the first point where the process can be sort of caught or tracked for most people is at this link between feeling and craving, where Vedana connects with Tanha. And so much of the instruction in the sort of forest tradition, the aim is to in a sense focus upon the realm of feeling, and to notice when feeling turns into desire, and so that that it becomes a key element of practice. Where the other day we were talking about how you can be in the presence of something that's painful, but you can also learn how not to hate it. Just because it's awful and painful doesn't mean that we have to hate it. It's just because someone's behavior is insulting or hurtful, we don't have to pile hatred upon them. It's still bitter, it's still uncomfortable, but the hatred that is put onto that is something extra. So we can know the feeling of pain without fearing it, without hating it, without creating suffering around it. Like I was talking about the Buddha having chronic back pain, and that it was a continual experience of discomfort, but he didn't create any suffering out of that painful feeling. And so this this aspect of the ring of fire, in a way, this is one of the key places where you can break free, the breaking free of the ring of fire, the circle, is at that realm of or the bridge between feeling and craving. And so that once that bridge has been crossed, and then you have the next elements that I won't go into today, but of craving, condition, grasping conditioning, becoming conditioning, birth. In a way, the process is getting sort of too strong, and the mind is getting too absorbed into the disliked object or the desired object, and so that there's a compulsion, or the mind is already pursuing that or fighting against it. So it's because of that tension in the system, it's less easy to see clearly. But at the realm of Vedana, of feeling, that's when the mind can still be most clearly aware and not caught up. So that's seen as the sort of key point in terms of a meditation practice, learning to recognize, oh, this is just the feeling of disliking, or this is the feeling of liking. And the story that's very often told is that Ajahn Chah at the Hampstead Vihara back in the 1970s, when it was one of those rare hot summer nights in London, and there was a big crowd of people gathered in the small shrine room in the Hampstead Vihara, and right across on the other side of the road is the Haverstock Arms, the pub. And being an active and busy pub in London, had loud rock music blaring out. And so as the group was gathered for the meditation, then for a while they'd sit with the windows closed, but then it was getting very, very hot and steamy, and then they'd open the windows, and then the music would be twice as loud, and then they have the windows open for a bit, and then they close the windows, and Ajahn Chah is just sitting there, completely still the whole time, not a flicker, nothing showing at all. And so there's the windows opening, windows closing, windows opening, windows closing. And he sat there for an hour and a half, letting people investigate the experience. And then at the end of an hour and a half, he rang the bell and said, "Yeah, you think the sound is annoying you, but actually it's you annoying the sound." And so that in that little simple phrase, it captures so much, that it's because of the mind getting upset with a particular sense experience, then we create suffering out of it. If you just let it be a sound, you might not like it, but it's just a sound. There's no dukkha created out of it. So I will leave the presentation there for this evening. Still got a few more links to pursue, but I'll leave it there for now. But if there's any particular questions or things that could do with some clarifying, please don't be shy.
Buddhism's sort of, in a way, it's a tricky subject. It's a tricky one. In Theravada Buddhism, the khandhas are not self. As we say, the khandhas are not self. And then it sort of goes that little step where it sort of hints that you might not be there, you know? It's in one way or another. Sometimes that sort of comes across.
It says, Sabbe Sankara Anicca, Sabbe Sankara Anicca, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. All Dhammas are not self.
Not self, yeah. But it believes in the mind, and the mind can't be seen, or touched, or found. It believes in something that is not touched, found, or even a surgeon cannot tell you where your mind is.
Where is the wrong question?
Or what it is.
But it can know. That's the essentially practical aspect of the Buddha's teaching, that he didn't bother going into intricate philosophical explanations. He said you don't have to understand the origins of knowing or what knowing actually is, but you know that you can know. That's what's important. So that it's I wouldn't say it's tricky. I mean, it's a subtle teaching, but it frustrates the thinking mind. So if you want to create a conceptual map, then of life, the universe, and everything, then you're going to be disappointed. But the Buddha's, I feel part of the Buddha's genius is to say, this is all you need to know, just this much. As he said over and over again, what I know is comparable to the leaves in the forest, or what I tell you is comparable to the leaves in my hand. It's a specifically limited amount that you need to know, and that you don't have to define the fundamental nature of the citta, but what is the absolute nature of awareness. But there can be that knowledge of there is awareness. The mind is awake. That's all you need to know.
So that signifies some form, this is the difficult bit, but the knowing quality doesn't age or sicken. It's constant of consciousness. But whether we could say it was an existence, but we couldn't say it doesn't exist. So, you know, you've got the middle way, haven't you, where either way you would be wrong and you'd both be right. You have two truths. So it's the sort of $24,000 question, isn't it?
Well, so there's a wonderful statement by the Buddha. He says, in Pali it goes, Yena hi manyanti tatatang hoti anyatati, which means whatever you conceive it to be, the fact is always other than that. So what he was pointing to is that the reality is inconceivable, but also we don't need to conceive it because we are it. It's like the waves discussing what the nature of the sea is. So that's why his emphasis on dukkha and the ending of dukkha is absolutely brilliant, because we don't have to have a conceptual map, but we can recognize this is disharmonious, this is harmonious, this is free of suffering, this is bound up with suffering, and that presence of dukkha is the sign that there is clinging going on, there's ignorance at work, and the absence of dukkha is the sign that there is no clinging going on, there is no ignorance there. So that it's a deliberately limited teaching, but is extraordinarily effective, because in this moment that you can see how the mind can create suffering by clinging, and if the clinging stops, the suffering stops. That's all we need to know. The thinking mind goes but but it can do that. But the essential thing is dukkha and the ending of dukkha. And with that ending of dukkha, you still might not know how to make a good souffle, but that it won't be a problem.
I suppose in the Heart Sutra it says, Gate, Passam Gate, Bodhiswara, gone beyond. Gone beyond what? Anything you want to pick up, it's gone beyond it. But that's hard to explain, isn't it? Because what worries me sometimes with Theravada interpretation is that denial of existence, which can be quite dangerous, or permanently exists. We always got to say, well, there's not anything permanent, but it's that when you get that little bit, then what really is all emptiness.
Well, that's a misunderstanding. That the Buddha deliberately said, I do not teach this as the annihilation of an existent being. Those who say that, they misrepresent me, and they do not say what I say. There's he categorically states that. But it's good being misunderstood. It's very good practice being misrepresented and misunderstood. It's very fine spiritual training. Okay, I think that's enough. Tomorrow it's the anniversary of Luang Por Chah's passing away. Hence we have a shrine for Luang Por and these different display boards that have been created. And so it's 23 years ago, on the 16th of January, Luang Por Chah passed away. So we'll be having tomorrow. I won't continue with this, but I'll be reading out some Luang Por Chah's teachings just before the mealtime, and probably the morning reflection of the meditation, and then at this reading time in the evening, I'll be sharing some of Luang Por Chah's teachings during the day as a way of bringing his presence to mind and reflecting on his own words and his legacy to us, because of course none of this would be here, none of us would be here if it wasn't for him. This little guy sitting going into the forest in Thailand and saying, this life, I'm going to do it. Whatever else happens, I'm going to give it my all. And so we are the fortunate inheritors of his resolution. So tomorrow will be a particular day to recollect Luang Por's teachings, and they have been gathering at the Wat Pah Pong over the last week, and so tomorrow will be the sort of main festival day, but they've been having a week-long period of group meditation and Dhamma talks through Wat Pah Pong. Several thousand people gather there every year. So that's enough for today. Let's carry on with Ajahn Sucitto's the end of his chapter on this. So this is the last couple of pages of Getting Burned. When there is ignorance or unknowing, we don't really know what we're feeling. As I have suggested above, much of the time we're in contact with our perceptions because they can create images in accordance with desire. Such is the next loop of fire, craving, which is tanha in its fully conscious form. Here it is represented by the thirsting mouth and the hand always reaching out to get the water from a perceived mirage. Feeling links to desire. If what is felt through the senses is not desirable or brings up aversion, the unawakened instinct creates a fantasy that is attractive. One of the bitterest aspects of the unawakened life is that when you have enough physically, your mind creates fantasies. Your mind creates fantasies to crave. Nowadays in Western culture, our normal reality is composed of fantasies vividly portrayed on television, in movies, novels, shows and advertisements. They seem harmless enough, but the contact with them and the feelings they induce unconsciously affect our values. People end up voting for a fantasy, being governed by a fantasy, using fantasy money, having fantasy enemies and chasing fantasy goals. The only real element left is suffering, but that is repressed or not acknowledged because it doesn't fit into the fantasy. In the brave new world, everybody's happy. Ignore the rest. So that was what we read to last time. Without ignorance, desire is not suffering. We can understand desire. It is something that we can watch in order to know its ethical quality. We can act on skillful desires with dispassion, we can respond to the signals of bodily need, and we can let go of desires that are born from greed, hatred, or delusion. Then we're not acting in ignorance, and we can use the energy of desire to investigate the mind and bring goodness into the world. Craving to have, or to annihilate, links up to grasping or clinging, upadana. Oh, by the way, is Sister Brahmavara there? I did look up upadina, and upadinika, and it does indeed come from upadana. It means that which is grasped, or that which is attached to. So you were right. So, upadana. Like desire, clinging is a function of natural bodily life. Babies do it with good reason. But the unknowing recreates that as a compulsive mental activity. And clinging to the wrong things is a frustrating, stressful and dangerous experience. Clinging to sensory experience with ignorance is always going to let you down because there's no having enough. And all sensory experience is unreliable. It changes and ends. If you hang your life expectations on the sensory world, it will take you to despair. It's like climbing a mountain, clinging to a fraying rope. Maybe we shouldn't have any clinging, but those who wish to awaken hold on to teachings and the practices that lead to liberation. So again, the problem really is ignorance, clinging blindly. When there is no ignorance, we can hold on to things as physical necessities or mentally as workable conventions, responsibilities or commitments. The blanket no clinging statement is something which can be used to authorize opportunist shifts of loyalties and the dismissal of rules and precepts. The ultimate clinging is, of course, to the self of you. So what he's saying there, as in that one of the readings of Ajahn Chah about learning how to hold but to let go. So, and Ajahn Chah was using the image of picking up a flashlight, or say picking up this glass of water. You pick it up, you hold it, and you put it down. The whole theme of that particular teaching that Luang Por Chah was giving was that there's nothing wrong with holding. Holding is useful and necessary. We need to use that capacity to pick things up and hold them. We need conventions. We need to be able to act and engage with the world. But the difference between grasping and holding is quite categorical. It's a whole different dimension. It's a whole different quality, and so that Ajahn Sucitto is echoing the same thing, that is the real problem is clinging blindly. When there's no ignorance, we can hold on to things as physical necessities or as workable conventions, so following the particular standards of society and fulfilling the responsibilities and duties that we have. And then he goes on to say the blanket no clinging statement, so that sometimes people can take the idea, the Buddha Dhamma says you shouldn't cling to anything, therefore we should toss out all the rules and conventions, we shouldn't be respectful of any rules or laws or conventions. That's all attachment, that's all just clinging. And it's you don't see so much of it nowadays, but it was extremely popular back in the 70s and 80s, and sort of the Rajneesh era, and there was a lot of what they call they were called crazy wisdom, where there was a sort of conscious breaking out of conventions by defying them, but that led to a great deal of say stress and confusion. I would tend to meet a lot of the survivors in California of people who've been through that kind of perception. There's an interesting story told by some of Master Hua's disciples. There was in that era, back in the late 60s, early 70s, there was this character called Sufi Sam, who was a sort of Bay Area freewheeling guru of kind of do what you will, and we're all one kind of spirituality. And he has sort of a kind of a hippie, dope smoking, free love kind of spirituality. And so it's quite a counterpoint to Master Hua and his group, which was a sort of hyper strict. I mean, we're a very serious Vinaya keeping tradition, and his group very much too, and very very austere, absolutely strict, 1 meal a day, totally vegetarian, never lie down to sleep at night, and such like. And one thing that was what happened was I was told by some of his Master Hua's disciples is that Sufi Sam ended up dying suddenly from some kind of an accident, and and so there'd been a certain amount of exchange within the Bay Area. Different spiritual practitioners would meet each other and cross paths here and there. And what happened was that after Sufi Sam passed away, then the next day, several of his disciples also showed up at Gold Mountain Monastery, which is in this old mattress factory down in the industrial area of San Francisco, and so they were very surprised seeing all these kind of hippie, kind of hairy, multicolored characters tumbling through the door of Gold Mountain Monastery. And what had happened was that after Sufi Sam had had this accident and died, then he had apparently, so they say, appeared in the dreams of many of his students. They had all had the same dream, and in the dreams, Sufi Sam came to them and said, "Listen, you guys, I had it all wrong. All this kind of free love, sex, drugs, and rock and roll spirituality. I was totally off the map. I was completely wrong. And actually, the best spiritual teacher in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, is this Chinese guy. He's really strict, but he's got a really good heart. So, give up on the dope and free sex, and just go and bow to this guy, because he's the one who's got the mojo." And they all had the same dream. About 7 or 8 of them all had the same dream. And then they kind of woke up and that morning said, "Hey, I had the funniest dream last night." "Oh yeah, you too? Well, man. Okay, where's this Gold Mountain?" And they all trooped up there. So it was obviously a very significant day in the history of Gold Mountain Monastery, like this bunch of wild hippies coming through the door. And so Master Hua got a few more disciples. I think it was a few haircuts, but that was very much the toss out all the rules, toss out all the conventions, and so on. When there's ignorance, clinging acts as a base for becoming, bhava, which I've already talked about. Out of craving, one attaches to some object, and then sees it as a way of personal development or fulfillment. In the traditional paintings on this theme, bhava is symbolized by a pregnant woman. It is that sense of an inner separate being which leads to birth. But here, I've related it more to the weariness of having to sustain the sense of personal development. Do you know the myth of Sisyphus, who was the person whose punishment in a Greek hell was that he had to roll a huge boulder up to the top of a mountain. It took him a long time to get this vast boulder up the slope, and whenever he got close to the top, it would break loose and roll down to the bottom, and he'd have to go down and roll it back up. That's becoming. So there in the little motif of Ajahn Sucitto's painting, you have Sisyphus there with a big rock on his back climbing up this very steep slope. And in the myth, Sisyphus, you know what terrible crime he was guilty of? If I remember correctly, it was protecting his daughter from getting molested by Jupiter. Zeus was after his daughter, and he said, "No, you can't. She's my daughter. Get lost." And so Zeus, mighty Zeus, the thunderer, took great exception to that. And so it wasn't as though Sisyphus had really done anything that was inappropriate or wrong, but he still got the pushing the rock up to the top of the mountain for eternity as his reward. So the Greek mythological version of karma and its result is very, very different set of teachings. So that's becoming. It leads to birth, jati. And such a birth is not the promised birth of fulfillment, but the experience of oneself as someone who's not quite there yet. So these two, the 10th and 11th vignettes, link up and with ignorance continuing support dukkha. So the image of birth in the circle of fire is still a little baby having been freshly born. When speaking about this whole process of feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, and birth, another image that I often present is rather like being at a train station. So Vedana is like standing on the platform and there's the train. And the train isn't moving. You can get on the train, you can get off the train, the doors are open, you have no danger whatsoever. You can get on the train, you can see the train, and you can get off the train if you don't want to go with it. So then that is the realm of feeling. There's no difficulty there. There's no inherent dukkha. Tanha is like when you got on the train. As I realize Juan is here, as a train driver as well as our librarian, just by chance. So. But nowadays, of course, they can lock the doors and you can't get off the train. But back in the days when you could open the doors, the progress keeps ruining these analogies, but never mind. Or in countries where they don't have trains with automatic doors. So as the train starts to move off, it's still in the station, but it starts to move, then you realize, I don't really want to be on this train, I better get off. So then the train is already moving, but you open the door and hop onto the platform. Maybe you stumble a bit, but you're still okay. Upadana is like there's clinging, the train is really getting underway, and you're still in the station, but it's really picking up speed, and you think, we're taking off, we're going. I really don't want to be on this train, I better get off now. So then you get the door open, and then you jump out onto the platform, but it's really a bit dangerous, and you're going a bit fast. And so then you kind of stumble a bit and fall over and scratch your knees, but you're okay. Bhava is when the train is out of the station, underway, and that you're going at full speed, and you can open the door and you can jump off, but it's going to be pretty messy if you do make a jump. And then birth is where the train is fully gone, and it's taken you to its destination. There's no turning back. You've already arrived at there. There's no getting away from it. So birth is the point of no return. So that you've got to the next station. You're off the train. Everybody off. It's end of the line. Off the train. And then you're committed to having arrived in that place. So that is also an image of that sense of progression and the difficulty that as the momentum picks up with clinging, with craving, clinging, becoming, that sense of a greater commitment and a sort of more of an absorption in the object I feel is a very accurate and useful say, way of portraying that, because certainly that's how I experience it. And when the mind is in that full becoming mode, like, yeah, I really want it, I'm going to get it, and that the universe has shrunk to that one promised object, then it's extremely hard to get off the train at that point. And if you do, then it's like it's really there's a lot of aftermath. So when they've tested people out, sometimes they're looking at the whole process of desire and pleasure. They would put various scientists would put what they call galvanic skin responders, like little electronic devices to measure your the skin and its electrical conductivity. And so they found that the moment, and then they would send people shopping or off to watch a particular show or something. And so that when someone goes shopping, the moment of maximum excitement, when the whole system is cranked up to its highest level, and they can do this with brain chemistry too, so that the maximum level of endorphin release, which is the sort of pleasure chemical of your brain, is when you know you're going to get what you want, but you haven't quite got it yet. So that when you're standing at the counter, you're getting you've asked for the thing that you want. The person behind the counter is about to give it to you, and that's the peak. You're guaranteed to get it, but you haven't quite got it yet. And then as soon as you've actually got it, you start to be disappointed, even before you've got it home. Which is chemically that's what the body chemistry shows. It's very, very universal. And it's also interesting that A.A. Milne spotted this. You find it in Winnie the Pooh. Also, Winnie the Pooh said, the best thing in the world is honey. He said, well, actually, no, that's not true. The best thing in the world is having a pot of honey and knowing that you're going to have it, but not quite having started on it yet. So I believe in chapter 2 of The House at Pooh Corner. Right? I looked it up last year. So that's the bhava is like really the drug that drives the consumer culture. Very appropriately named, the consumer culture. It's like that's what advertising pushes the mind towards, is that becoming thrill. And then after you had the disappointment of, I got what I wanted, then the next advert, the next promise, the next partner, the next meditation retreat, the next Dhamma book, then that's the promise that we keep following. That's in a way the essence of becoming. I remember once I was with this family, and there was this little girl's birthday, and and she was in floods of tears. Little kid, about 3 or 4 years old, and she was in floods of tears, and her mother was sort of fussing with her, and a bit sort of disturbed. Like, oh, what's the matter? We got you the doll that you were asking for. Is there what's the matter? Is it broken? And then the kid was in lots and lots of tears, and they went back and forth with the mum. And eventually she said that when the little girl could sort of speak a bit more clearly, she said, "I got what I wanted." That's what she was upset about, was that she got what she wanted, but she had so much expectation. It was going to be so perfect and so good and so wonderful. It was exactly what she wanted, but it was just this, and it was very strangely insightful. The little kid, like, I got what I wanted, but it's just this doll. It's exactly what I wanted, but this is all it is. And those of us who've been, when we're little kids on Christmas, when you've been looking forward to Christmas for so long and hoping and expecting, and suddenly Christmas is just another day. Oh, after you've ripped most of the presents open. So that this is all talking about dependent origination, and that birth of being born into that particular object and then having to live with it through to its aging and death. One of the problems on the spiritual path which we walk on as unawakened aspirants is the sense of trying to become something. It's normal because we've been doing that all the time with every pursuit that we ever taken up. And the pursuit of ultimate well-being, or wisdom, enlightenment, or whatever, really engages our becoming instincts. We always feel that we're not yet right. If only we try a little harder, we might get the boulder to the top of the mountain. Try a little harder and we'll get there. Where? Who? Wise instruction teaches us about humility, patience, and the need to be with the present moment. Don't seek personal development. Practice developing beyond personal need. Practice generosity, service, selflessness. Wise becoming is called bhavana, cultivation of the path, not self-view. If cultivation is always coming from self-views, you get caught up in the sense of failure, or the other kind of becoming, wanting not to become, vibhava tanha, wanting to annihilate your desires and your weaknesses. Thus you get born as a fanatic, a starry-eyed devotee, or a tight-lipped zealot. And whatever you get born into deepens the karmic self-producing tendencies, so that when that birth ends, and you've given up on Buddhism and become a Sufi, or you've given up on Sufism and taken to Gestalt, and you're even more preoccupied with yourself and your problems and your importance. So death in ignorance, that is, not waking up when your current world, relationships, or occupation or body end, takes you into the possibility for more dukkha. So I'll read that again. That's a kind of a complex sentence. So when you've given up on Buddhism and become a Sufi, or given up on Sufism and taken up Gestalt, you're even more preoccupied with yourself and your problems and your importance. The self-view is being compounded in even more. So death in ignorance, that is, not waking up when your current world, relationships, occupation or body come to an end, so that not waking up when those things come to an end takes you into the possibility for more dukkha. So that he's talking about how the last link, the 12th link, then hooks up with more dukkha in the future. The 12th factor of dependent origination is aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Jara maranang soka parideva dukkha domanasu payasa. A comprehensive, if stark, summary of the consequences of attachment to birth. How many trips and games are we going to buy into and get infatuated with and disillusioned by before we recognize the dukkha of attachment? Plenty, it seems, because dukkha is ignored. And so the habitual reactions to dukkha take you deeper into the cycle of ignorance, and round we go again. So the 12th factor then links up to avijja, and not understanding dukkha then leads to more dukkha. Not that becoming, birth and death are suffering on their own. When there's wisdom, as in the case of the Buddha, the identity of being an enlightened one, a teacher, the head of an order, was not taken personally. He even referred to himself in the third person. This role is just something that happens out of the compassionate desire to offer the teachings to those who wish to hear. He never sought disciples. He even encouraged people to stay with their old religions, but to use them wisely. Even at his own death, he had no concern that his teaching might die out. He realized that he'd offered what was necessary, so death can be freed from anxiety with the ending of the self-view. But also that, speaking about that, the 12th link there, there's a particularly useful teachings that the Buddha gave about this. Well, in the Itivuttaka, he says, dukkha can ripen in one of two ways. It can ripen in more dukkha, or it can ripen in search. And so ripening in more dukkha is where you got soka parideva dukkha domanasu payasa, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, and then the mind feeling that unhappiness, like the little girl with the doll that she got what she wanted, and it's so disappointing. Then further ignorance just makes us want another doll, or want something to distract ourselves with. So that's dukkha ripening as further dukkha, or it can ripen as search. And the way he characterizes search in that teaching is, he says, there must be some alternative to this. This can't be the whole story. There must be some way out of this particular cycle. And so that search is for an alternative. And so that really comes from our own panya, our own capacity for wisdom that says, this can't be the whole story. There must be something else. There must be a way to be free, basically. And then also the examples of the people around us, or those who are we see as spiritual mentors or exemplars. Oh yeah, well that person they look like they're a liberated person, or this or that saint or great figure out of the past. That, well, she certainly seems to be peaceful, or this was a great guru. So it seems, or I feel that there must be an alternative. So that ripening as search. And in another particular teaching on dependent origination, then the Buddha describes how then that dukkha ripens as faith. Saddha is and that faith is that this can't be the whole story. There's got to be an alternative. And then that faith leads to the strengthening of the quality of, say, gladness in the heart, and then gladness in the heart leads to relaxation in the body, leads to more contentment, leads to inspiration, which leads to concentration, which leads to insight, and then to liberation. So that suffering in that particular it's known as a teaching of transcendent dependent arising. So in that particular instance, that Sokaparideva dukkha domanas upayasa, that the result of that is not more avijja sort of going around, but the result of that dukkha is faith, and the faith that there's got to be an alternative to this, and then that faith leads into the development of the other spiritual qualities. So then just to read his last few paragraphs. We can even use death as a meditation object. With the ending of an experience, there's a moment when there's not knowing, a moment of space or emptiness. Normally, the ignoring habit immediately starts up again and sends a mad monkey racing round and back to the beginning. The whole thing flashes by very quickly. But to let the mind notice and give its full due to the ending of a sound, a thought, a mood, is an opportunity to recognize a state of being which is empty and yet vibrantly present. The ending of things offers a peek into the truth of cessation, not dukkha. We can see that the origin of this suffering process is compounded out of craving and not seeing. The remedy that the Buddha points out is actually right here, in the knowing. In the context of the second noble truth, we are knowing desire, not desiring to know. Cessation is not destruction or annihilation. It is the arrest of an activity so that it is seen clearly and ignorance does not condition the activities, and so on. Thoughts, feelings, desires, attachments, suffering, these are to be held by attention until they are, quote, dominated by mindfulness, surmounted by wisdom, yield deliverance as essence, merge in the deathless, and terminate in nibbana. And that's an abbreviated, very abbreviated version of the sutta from the Book of the Tens in the Anguttara Nikaya. This requires bringing forth faith and wisdom so that there is the ending of unknowing, of ignorance, avijja, and with that, the ending of all these possibilities for suffering. And that passage from the Anguttara, it starts off with the words Chandamula, rooted in interest are all things. Rooted in interest are all things, born of attention are all things, arising from contact are all things, meeting in feeling are all things, headed by concentration are all things, dominated by mindfulness are all things, surmounted by wisdom are all things, merging with, yielding deliverance as their essence are all things, merging in the deathless are all things, and terminating in nibbana are all things. So it starts off with interest, then interest, what's that? Attention, latching onto the interest, attention, and then the attention ripens into feeling. So it's a kind of an alternative dependent origination. So it's like there's interest, chanda, and then attention, manasikara, and then that it ripens into contact, like sense contact, that latches onto the particular sense object that you're giving attention to, and then that leads to feeling. But then rather than feeling, conditioning, craving, like the Vedana leading to tanha, then that feeling, it says, is headed by concentration, so headed by samadhi, so it's sort of held by the quality of samadhi, headed by concentration, dominated by mindfulness, and surmounted by wisdom. So it's like held by concentration and mindfulness, and then wisdom, recognizing, oh, this is a sight, this is a sound, this is a sensation. The mind focuses on it, it's mindful of it, and there's the wisdom of recognizing, this is anicca, dukkha, anatta, seeing that that's the nature of that experience. Then it yields deliverance as its essence. So then that seeing leads to deliverance, and then it says merging in the deathless, amata agoda, merging in the deathless and terminating in nibbana. So then you can spend a whole week talking about this particular teaching, but it's in a way it's when a sense experience is handled skillfully, when there's a true knowing of feeling, of Vedana, and the sense contact and the feeling that comes from it, then using concentration, using mindfulness, and using wisdom, then that leads to liberation and to the realization of the deathless and the experience of nibbana, true peacefulness. So it's a sort of parallel track to the other patterns of dependent origination. So what happens when perception and feeling are handled skillfully rather than when perception and feeling are handled unskillfully. So, any particular questions, reflections, confusions?
Could you give us an example of that being handled skillfully at that point of feeling?
Okay, so I'm interested in your question. I give it attention. Then there is the looking at you, Noon, as the person who's asking the question. So born of attention, arising from contact. So then I'm looking at you, even though I haven't got my glasses on. I know I can tell by your accent it is Noon. So then there's the perception and the feeling that goes with that. It's the Vedana that comes with that perception. Then headed by concentration, so I'm focusing upon the perception of looking at you. I'm mindful of say, looking at you and giving this explanation and how far I've got and what else I want to say in terms of the explanation. Then also headed by concentration, dominated by mindfulness. So I'm aware of there's there's things I've said so far. I'm aware it's also 5 minutes to 7. Sorry, 7.5 minutes to 7. So I haven't got that much time to play with. And then surmounted by wisdom. So surmounted by wisdom is then bring into play the fact, I'm speaking to Noon here at the Dhamma reading, and here we are in the sala, but also this is sight, sound, feeling, hearing, smelling, tasting, all taking shape, being woven into. Here is the patterns of experience arising and passing away. These are mental formations. Here's my mind's representation of Noon, and the representation of these words and concepts and meaning coming together out of sound, and my hands separating and coming together, the feeling of touch in my fingers and the palms of my hands as my hands come together and separate. So that is recognized in wisdom as a succession of mental events, patterns of consciousness arising and passing away that are anicca, dukkha, anatta. So then recognizing this moment, the pattern of this moment is anicca, is dukkha, anatta. It doesn't have technically there's me speaking, and this is our evening gathering for the reading, but it doesn't really have an owner. We say this is me speaking, but wisdom recognizes that's a convenient fiction. It's not. There isn't really a permanent, separate individual I who is the owner or the creator of these words, or the listener or the hearer of the words. And so, when things are seen with wisdom, this set of patterns of experience are anicca, dukkha, anatta. So yielding deliverance as their essence, the essence of that experience, or this experience now, is deliverance. It's like, that even though it's a fairly neutral experience, if it was distressing, I wish you would stop talking about me and looking at me, he's making me feel uncomfortable. Yeah. Or like, so this is so helpful, this is so wonderful, this is great, this is a turning point in my life. Yeah. Pleasant experience, painful experience, they both lead deliverance, like Luang Por Chah was saying over and over again. Gladness or sadness, they are equal value. They're just recognizing these are not who and what we are. These don't have an owner. They yield deliverance as their essence. So then the expression then merging with the deathless is even though sense perceptions are born and dying, merging with the deathless, if you like, is like saying, recognizing these are all received into the space of awareness, or that they are that deathless quality. Again, it gets a bit delicate to speak about intangibles or inconceivables, but you can look at that quality of knowing as the main aspect of the attribute of the deathless state, and so that things merging with the deathless is like it's all received into the space of the knowing mind. Like no matter how much rain falls on the sea just absorbs the rain, and the sea doesn't get changed by that. It just absorbs it. It just takes it in, so that the quality of knowing absorbs all experience. That if you say it merges with the deathless, amatogada is the Pali for that. And then terminating in nibbana is that experience of being that knowing, being that awareness, and letting all sense perceptions, gladness, sadness, to dissolve in that quality of knowing, be received into that knowing quality. The felt experience of that is peacefulness, nibbana. So there you go.
Yes, you've got to be pretty on it to catch it there.
Yeah, it's like falling out of a tree,
Yeah.
But we have opportunities all day long, every day, and so in a way, hence simplicity, hence non-violence, hence celibacy, hence routines. The simpler that we can live, and the more harmless, and the more that our actions are wholesome and create as little sort of karmic ripples as possible, as little sort of emotional stress or bondage as possible, then the easier it is to see those patterns happening. The more that things are busy or complicated, the more emotionally charged, the more that things are conducive to self-creation, then the more complicated it gets, the harder it is to see. It's a pretty simple relationship. A tangle of 3 threads is easier to undo than a tangle of 300 threads.